This is a silly little video on enzyme inhibitors and how to visualize them on graphs. Disclaimer, this is a very simplified overview, so if you want more information on the equations, check the description for videos on that. Here is the 411 on enzymes. Enzymes are proteins that help catalyze reactions. They do this by stabilizing the transition state of a reaction, and that lowers the activation energy. But a basic enzyme reaction in kinetics, you're going to be looking at enzyme plus substrate forms an enzyme substrate complex, and then the products formed, released, and the enzyme remains the same. We're ready for the next substrate. So we're going to assume that our enzymes can only work so fast, and there is a certain velocity, Vmax, when the enzyme's working at its max capacity as fast as it can. And let's say it takes 5 seconds for an enzyme to form a product, then all the other substrates are going to have to wait 5 seconds until the enzyme has a space for them to enter in, and that's going to contribute to our Vmax. And so our Vmax in this case would be 1/5, which is the amount of substrate it removes from the substrate pool and converts into products per second. More assumptions for enzyme kinetics, one being steady state, the next being that we have much higher of a concentration of substrate than enzyme, and we're only measuring the initial velocity. One of the ways that enzyme kinetics is displayed in graphs is the Michaelis Menten graph, which would have the x-axis being substrate concentration and the y-axis being velocity. The two important values we get from our Michaelis Menten plot is our Vmax, which is that horizontal asymptote, which represents the maximum velocity that the enzyme can reach, and Km, which is the concentration of substrate at half Vmax, and it represents the enzyme's affinity for substrate. The Lineweaver Burk plot takes the two important points we had from our Michaelis Menten plot and then has actually the inverse of them as the two intercepts. So the x-intercept is 1/Km and the y-intercept is 1/Vmax. This is the first inhibitor we're going to be talking about. It's a competitive inhibitor. It straight up just blocks the enzyme's active site so that the substrate can't bind. This is the Michaelis Menten plot and what it would look like with and without the competitive inhibitor. So with the competitive inhibitor, the Vmax is the same, and that is because there's a certain amount of substrate that you can keep adding and it will actually overtake the inhibitor. The idea here is just that it takes a lot more substrate and a higher concentration of it to actually reach Vmax. This is a Lineweaver Burk for competitive inhibitors, and to me, it kind of looks like two swords, like crossing each other, or lightsabers, and that's how I remember it. Moving right along to non-competitive inhibitors. Now, this type of inhibitor actually binds to the allosteric site and not the active site, and it causes a conformational change that makes the substrate no longer able to fit in as well to the enzyme. The conformational change causes Vmax to be less, and that's how it will look in Michaelis Menten. This is how it will look in Lineweaver Burk. I like to remember that you can actually kind of draw an N for non-competitive, and that's how I remember it. Now, mixed inhibitors also bind on the allosteric site, but some of mixed inhibitors prefer to bind to the enzyme substrate complex, and then some prefer to bind to just the free enzyme. In both cases, Vmax lowers, but when it prefers to bind to the ES, Km lowers, and when it prefers to bind to just the free enzyme, Km actually is greater. This is what the Michaelis Menten would look like for those two, and this is what the Lineweaver Burk would look like for those two. Uncompetitive inhibition is a special type of mixed inhibition where the inhibitor equally binds to ES and to free enzyme. In uncompetitive inhibition, the Km lowers and the Vmax lowers. This is what that would look like on Michaelis Menten, and on Lineweaver Burk, it actually makes two parallel lines, and you can kind of draw out a U, and that's how I remember it. Yay! Those are all the main graphs for the different types of inhibitors and enzyme kinetics. Great job. Way to work your brain. I'm going to link a lot of other helpful videos in the description. Have a good rest of your day.